of the Great Society have been shot down on the battlefield of Vietnam, making the poor, white and Negro, bear the heaviest burdens both at the front and at home. Others can do what they want to do. That's their business. Other civil rights leaders, for various reasons, refuse or can't take a stand or have to go along with the administration. That's their business. But I must say tonight that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Wow. A threat to it justice anywhere is a threat to it everywhere. That is very powerful. Let's take a quick look at something. I just wanted to read this or read part of it. This was a statement from Mao Zedong, April 16, 1968, on the assassination of Martin Luther King, the reason that we have this holiday today. So I'll just read some of this. Some days ago, Martin Luther King Jr., the African American clergyman, was suddenly assassinated by the U.S. imperialists. Martin Luther King was an exponent of nonviolence. Nevertheless, the U.S. imperialists did not, on that account, show any tolerance towards him, but used counter-revolutionary violence and killed him in cold blood. This has taught the broad masses of the black people in the United States a profound lesson. It has touched off a new storm in their struggle against violent repression, sweeping well over 100 cities in the United States. A storm such as has never taken place before in the history of that country. It shows that an extremely powerful revolutionary force is latent in the more than 20 million black Americans. The storm of Afro American struggle taking place within the United States is a striking manifestation of the comprehensive political and economic crisis now gripping U.S. imperialism. It is dealing a telling blow to U.S. imperialism, which is beset with difficulties at home and abroad. The Afro American struggle is not only a struggle waged by the exploited and oppressed black people for freedom and emancipation, it is also a new clarion call to all exploited and oppressed people of the United States to fight against the barbarous rule of the monopoly. Let me just skip ahead. Racial discrimination in the United States is a product of the colonialist and imperialist system. The contradiction between the black masses in the United States and the U.S. ruling class circles is a class contradiction. Only by overthrowing the reactionary rule of the U.S. monopoly capitalist class and destroying the colonialist and imperialist system can the black people in the United States win complete emancipation. The black masses and the masses of white working people in the United States have common interests and common objectives to struggle for. Therefore, the Afro American struggle is winning sympathy and support from the increasing numbers of white working people and progressives in the United States. So, you can find more of this, and this isn't the only thing, but I just wanted to talk very briefly. This is Martin Luther King Day. Um, we're supposed to in this day honor him and the struggle of the civil rights movement. And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to come online and go on television, and they'll have the privilege to talk about Dr. King, and they'll espouse some of his famous quotes and play clips of his speeches, especially during the early part of the civil rights movement. And they'll talk about the "I Have a Dream," and that's when 500 million people will proclaim that they were at the Million Man March, and there's a lot of that. The reality is that Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in this country not by a communist. It wasn't killed by the Russians. He wasn't killed by the North Koreans. He wasn't killed by the Chinese. He wasn't killed by the Vietnamese. He was killed by Americans. He was probably killed by the American government. And the reality is that the United States power structure, they didn't like him when he started talking about things that were stepping beyond the scope of simple black liberation. Now, even black liberation had its limits, as you can tell by his talking about the Great Society. The reality is that I have a dream and the freedom and all that was fine as long as it meant freedom to live in cities that the power structure could use for their political gain. But as soon as, I Have a Dream became more than being cheap labor for the whites of pre-segregation, or cheap labor for the people who lived in these cities that all the blacks were moving into, giving up land that they owned, which made no sense. Um, that shift, all that did was aid and abet the power structure that's still in place to this day. And what Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and many others were trying to warn is that there's something that goes beyond the black struggle. It's a human struggle, it's a class struggle. And that class, I argue in my commentary on this channel, has gone far above and beyond the quote unquote working class. I believe that class is now expanded to the general class of people who are not in the club. If you have to get up and work every day, you're part of the working class. It's not just people who work on an assembly line in a factory. Let's be honest. You know almost nobody in your life that works at a factory. Those days are over here. You're working class if you have to work. It could be working at Walmart. It could be working at Starbucks. It could be working at a law firm. It could be working at a bank. It could be working, an insurance company. But most people have to get up and they have to work. If you have to work because you can't afford to live without getting a week or a biweekly paycheck, then you are part of the new working class. You have been priced into it because of monetary inflation. You have been priced into it because of the same oppressing forces that killed Dr. Martin Luther King. And what he was saying at the end of his speech, I'll let him say it himself,
is a threat to justice everywhere. Justice everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere, folks.
Is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice
everywhere. Everywhere, including where Mao Zedong had fought. And believe me, Mao Zedong was well acquainted with the forces, of oppression. Joseph Stalin, all these people. There is a connection. The people that run the society in the West are the same enemies of the people that all of these revolutionary leaders around the world have been fighting against. Karl Marx talked about it. Karl Marx, when he wrote his letter to Abraham Lincoln, what he was telling Lincoln was that he was, and I'm paraphrasing, but he was proud of the efforts of the Union Army to eradicate slavery, because there's no way to have slavery in society if you're going to have freedom. You can't have it. So on this Martin Luther King Day, I want to take this opportunity, because there's not going to be a lot of this going around, especially not in the United States. But I want to take this opportunity to connect Martin Luther King as a revolutionary to the revolutionaries around the world. Not because I want to take away from his shine, but because I want to connect it to a greater light. And I want people to understand that Martin Luther King Jr., the reason that he was killed was because he shifted his conversation away from just civil rights for black people, and he shifted towards rights for all people. Because he realized that subjugation of anybody would mean subjugation of everybody. And that's exactly what he was fighting against, and that's why he was killed. Because for our political and economic system to work, there must be oppressed people. This is the sad, dark, twisted, defeatist part that nobody wants to say out loud. I will say it again. For our political and economic system to exist, for it to function, a feature of it, a necessity of it, is that somebody must be oppressed. There is no way for this society to work if it works for everybody. That would be a different economic and political system. And that is what Dr. Martin Luther King was clearly exploring. That is what Albert Einstein was exploring. That's what Tesla was exploring. That's what Lincoln was exploring. That's what the entire young Republican Party of the mid 19th century was exploring as they read Karl Marx's work in the New York newspaper, the New York Tribune that he worked for. So this is all part of it. So on this day, when everybody's going to be focused on some of the more theatrical parts of the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King, and as we usually do in these holidays, we celebrate the holiday, but we don't remember any of the content. I want to focus on Dr. Martin Luther King's thoughts on greater revolution and on freedom of all people, because he realized that the power structure and the ability to subjugate anyone anywhere is what feeds the economic and political system. And that's how you have the forces that get to create the Jim Crows. That's how you have the forces that get to say, we're going to create the Great Society. Well, in that Great Society, we're going to make sure that the race of people that fought for this freedom, that they're subjugated to the CIA selling drugs in those cities. We're going to make sure that they're subjugated to taking the father out of the household. We're going to make sure that we reward single mothers for having more children without fathers. We're going to make sure that there's no healthy grocery stores. We're going to make sure that there's a liquor store on every corner. We're going to make sure that these young people get the worst education possible. And we're going to make sure that we can arrest them at a high rate so that we can get them back into the cheap labor force. Because the only jobs we want for these people is slavery. That is the legacy of the great society that Dr. Martin Luther King had seen and realized. And the power structure knew that the longer he was around, the more he was going to talk about it. And the more he talked about it, the more black people were going to get angry. Because it's more powerful to have somebody like him going from nonviolence and turning the other cheek to getting furious. And if he started connecting his movement with the movements of communist China, the Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, Chile, and every other country, then the U.S. would have a real problem on its hands. Because, like every capitalist, imperialist country, it has to feed off subjugated people. And black people are still subjugated. We're just subjugated in a different way. It's not through the legal system directly, it's indirectly. And we have no leaders in our community, and we have no representation in the government. And every time somebody makes it, quote unquote, all they do is mock the rest of the community. Are there some people doing good things? Yes. But they're few and far between. So let's remember what he said. Let's remember what he thought. And let's remember that this greater struggle is not just about black people, but it's about all people who are stuck underneath the same subjugation and system. And that black people are the best example of a group of strong, resilient people that have been subjugated to the stuff that is being used on everybody in the West right now. Recognize it, appreciate it, and learn your history. Thank you, Dr. Martin Luther King. And one day you'll truly be free.